Hello everyone and welcome back to another kind of Explorer's Guide to Ravion world building video. This time we're going to cover another region within the Remont Empire. This one is going to be the Murk Coast. The Murk Coast is kind of the southern edge of the Horsehead Peninsula. It's this warm and humid climate with a lot of tidal influence on the swampy landscape, leaving a lot of the civilized people of the region building their homes on stilts to escape the algae-ridden waters below. These waters are full of various dangers, as you can imagine. So if I pull up the map here, it's this kind of gray section towards the bottom here. It has a few different territories within it, but it goes all the way up to the Wellock Sea, butts up against the Lachlan Majacre Sea and the Delta region, and then finally the Grassbend region to the north. It's a very, very large region comparatively, and it follows quite a bit of the Remont Empire's coastline, but it by no means has the majority of this coastline to it. So, I'll dump back out of there. Geological composition of this Murk Coast is mainly basalt and slate, with large boulders being kind of present, but it's otherwise very sandy and loamy consistency with small gold flakes within this tidal swamp waters. Basically, the region itself, as a swamp, has all of these kind of large cypress trees and other larger trees that are growing in the water and around it on these kind of spits of land that come in and out of the landscape and impossible. And then these kind of waters in and of themselves are full of gold material, gold dust, that as tidal action kind of makes its way through and slurries up the sand and the various muck and everything off of the bottom of the swamp, kind of swirls these gold flecks around in the water, kind of like Coronado Beach in California. You do have stuff like gold dust kind of moving around in the water. Not a lot, but at least some where it's noticeable. The people of this region do make their home on stilts. It's a swamp. It has a lot of dangerous aspects to it. You don't really have the dingo ate my baby in this area, but the alligator ate your baby if you're not really careful. And so they want to get up and out of the way of all of these kind of dangers. Especially since as tidal action happens, waters will rise and fall very dramatically when it comes to kind of this tidal flow and then storms. Having your house higher on stilts than the water's surface even would feasibly become is probably going to be the safest bet. And so that's how people have built their houses so far within this region. So the ecosystem of the Murk Coast is that of a really tidally influenced cypress swamp. Much of the flora is either these kind of tall hydrophytic trees like cypress and mangroves that live within the flooded watery areas, or flora that grow with on top of these same trees or on the water's surface. But they have to be a little bit more hardy because of this tidal influence. It's kind of a rough area to live if you're a plant on the ground, so there isn't too much there. It's extremely salty based on this tidal influence from the sea. It's open to the ocean otherwise, so this heavy salty influence have made the fauna of the region typically saltwater species or amphibious that have a little bit more of this salt tolerance. The region as a whole is remarkably vertical, with some of the areas of the cypress trees reaching up to 100 feet, and the deepest sections of the water reaching as deep as 150 feet in some of the most unforeseeable places. These hidden pools surround the normal depths of the region, but it's usually, if I make it a little bit more clear, usually it's going to be about 3 to 4.5 feet deep around any given random place where you're walking. So for the most part, a person could walk around as necessary to try to get around and make it through the waters of the region. But all of a sudden, you'll find a spot where the ground will give way. This kind of sandy, silty ground beneath you will give way, and all of a sudden, you're in a spot that's 150 feet deep. This tidal influence has eroded various kind of rivulets through that are dangerous areas to try to randomly traverse. So I can already picture, you have your paladin in full plate mail armor, and they're wading through the swamp because they have to get to whatever city, and then all of a sudden, boom, they go down. and heavy armor. So now they're on the bottom of a 150-foot pool. And then, oh hey, what's living in this 150-foot pool? Not what's living in the 3 to 4 feet deep water, but all of a sudden you have an area large enough to hold a large dragon, if you really wanted. And so that's kind of the dangerous aspects here. Is you have some of the more aquatic species that are present within the region, and then you have various magical species that can be amphibious, like some of the green or black dragons. Sometimes they have the ability to breathe air and water, so they could be hiding beneath the water surface and you'd never know it. So travelers have made quite a bit of time simply kind of slipping beneath the surface as the muck gives way, uh, typically using boats to avoid this. Uh, they try to travel quietly to avoid the dangerous fauna that lies beneath the water. Like I said, it could be something as crazy as a dragon or as expectable as a crocodile within this area. Uh, but at the same time, since it's a very vertical area, even if you were to be completely avoidant of creatures within the water, you have to be a little bit more cognizant of the creatures that live within the tall trees. That's the other kind of dynamic within this region. Is you have quite a bit of these aquatic species, but you also have a lot of the species that live up and out of harm's way from those species that are predators in and of themselves. You have things that will live in the tree branches or on the side of a tree trunk that are capable of taking you and removing you from the equation, so to speak. You can expect that a lot of these species are going to be very keen to watch and wait and then strike at the perfect moment to be able to snatch one or two of the people and either fly off with them or climb out of harm's way from the rest of the party with them, and they will have whatever time they need to do it. Things like a giant poisonous snake or a giant constrictor snake might live in the tire bounds of these kind of tall cypress trees, snatch somebody, and then constrict or hold them for consumption later on within the boughs of the trees. So, now we'll get into some of the more significant cultures. The significant cultures of the Murk Coast are typically the most reclusive people with limited social interaction with the remainder of the civilized world. There isn't much incentive to do any communicating with the group, the communicating with the rest of the more civilized world, uh, just on the basis of it's dangerous to try to travel there, and you could try to come up with some sort of an alliance with the people of the Murk Coast, but generally the people and the various species that are trying to hunt humanoids and other creatures like this are going to be at the edges of a settlement. And so, why would you brave this corona of danger that exists around a settlement so much as just live your own peaceful life and try to be quiet and not attract so much attention? So, the Avune are this culture of fish people that live around the water's surface. They kind of resemble a humanoid catfish. These Avene live simple lives as fishermen and gardeners of simple aquatic greens. They do tend to live inland, but they have these various interconnected pathways to various gardens and everything that they have moved the silt and sediment out of, especially around these deep pools. They've taken the 3 to 4 foot deep water, and in some places made it a little bit more deeper and tried to reinforce it against tidal flow so that they can grow food there. These are, and if you were going to look at like D&D races and monsters and everything else like that, these are Lokatha. These are fish people that live off of these aquatic greens. They are extremely peaceful people, accepting most people except for the various Sahuagin races and the Korakin that raid their villages for food and supplies. They do lose people to the Sahuagin and the Korakin, which is the other kind of groups that are within the region. But they are otherwise, if you were an adventuring party traveling through and stumbled across these Lokatha communities, they would have no problem with you, so much as you don't hurt them. And then, otherwise, they're peaceful. They're much they're much more akin to a school of fish that wants to quick get away, and one person might get caught, one fish might get caught, but for the most part then they understand that there's probably 90 fish that didn't get caught, and that's a sacrifice that they just have to be okay with, because what else are they going to do? So these Avonais are very nice people. They're fishermen, they're gardeners and farmers of various aquatic species, and they do everything that they can to lay on the low kind of radar, and if they have to, try to move throughout the swamp without attracting any attention from the Korakin or the Sahuagin. The Shugan are a tribe of raiding and pillaging Sahuagin. This is this race and group that does exist within the water. They endeavor to capture travelers on the road, and they harry townsfolk of the region on their stilted homes and pathways. But they are locked in an endless struggle with the Choctaw, the tribe of Korakin that struggle against the Shugan for various resources. So you have the Abune, who are hunted by these Sahuagin people called the Shugan, and the Korakin people that are called the Choctaw. They kind of get the raw deal, the Avenue, but then the Shugan are able to kind of expand from the Avenue alone as a resource and start targeting other groups. Historically, they've targeted the Avenue for a lot of different resources and food and hunting purposes, but they otherwise have recently started to try to go for the larger settlements, living out on the stilted homes area as they've expanded into from the coastline and farther into this kind of Murk Coast region. So the Shugan are putting themselves as kind of this encroaching force onto the territories of the Choctaw, and as the Avonais have fled inland just a little bit, they've become prey for both. And so that means that the Shugan are in direct competition with the Choctaw, but also with the uh, natural predators that they have, and then also with the civilized people that they've decided to try to hunt. So, finally, here, the Choctaw are a tribe of Korakin that tend to live solitary lives with little interconnection other than sort of loose power structures. Uh, the largest Korakin has the right and responsibility to throw its weight around and benefit from the boons of territory and acolytes, where these acolyte Korakin tend to be organized into a family structure, with this mated pair patrolling an area with their offspring, often until these offspring mature and seek a mate of their own and develop their own territories. Korakin are doting parents otherwise that support their families, and family leadership, being the larger parents, must assemble within the other Korakin families of the region to address disputes of territories, resources, or threats to the Korakin race. This means, just as a general kind of explanation, Korakin live in groups. They live in family groups. They have territories in and of themselves, and they dote on their children, and they are loving and caring to their children until those children get large enough and start to try to test the boundaries, and then they don't really have any patience ready for those children anymore, and so those youth have now grown and must go find their own territories and their own mates and expand and move on, and then kind of that's how this in like smaller dynamic works for the family group. But then when you have a lot of these associated territories, it's more beneficial to work with the other territories around you, hold your boundary line, but work with the other people to deal with larger species level threats like the Shugan and the various civilized races that might try to come after you because you've been hunting their people. Uh, they want to work with these larger groups, wherein the largest and most powerful Korakins tend to be the most influential members of that group. They tend to gain a lot of the respect based on just size and power alone. So these families benefit from this kind of group. They have individual family dynamics and then kind of a neighborhood watch, so to speak, where they do have some minor cooperation just to make sure that everyone is somewhat peaceful so that we don't have different conflicts breaking out between family groups that live close to each other. But Quora can benefit from advanced bipedal locomotion. They typically don't encroach on villages' upper platforms. They instead just kind of wait and harry travelers and unwary villagers that are close to the water's edge or in boats, as any other smaller creatures that may cross their path. They take those out as well. Uh, they are sworn enemies of the Shugen, and since the two of them struggle for territory and resources within the same area, the Chakti have united for the most part against the Shugen as much of their independent natures can allow. Each family group, it's not really a nation, it's a bunch of associated family groups that have agreed to kill all Shugen on sight. If you see a Sahuagin, see a Shugen, member of the Shugen people, they will hunt them down and, should it become necessary, chase them to the very edges of their territory and notify the next family group that there is a Shugen within their territory and aid that family group as necessary to hunt them down and kill the Shugen that may be hiding within their territory as a threat. However, once these Shugen are gone, you go back to your place or it's a problem, right? You have to leave their territory or it becomes an interfamily conflict. So you have to be very careful if you're dealing with the Korakin, which is another one of my homebrew races. They are a bipedal crocodile people. Kind of, I have the Gelkin, which are the much smaller lizards compared to lizard folk, and then I have the much larger, brutish crocodilian people of lizard folk, uh, that allow for a little bit more power, uh, and basically is the Goliath version of a lizard folk. They're a little bit larger, a little bit stronger, a little bit more terrifying, but then are another player option and NPC option should I deem it necessary. So that's it so far for the Murk Coast. Uh, it'll be kind of interesting because we have quite a bit of the kind of swampy region being able to be home for all of these different groups. And I should mention, as you get further south along the coastline, you do have this pass that leads along this other inland sea here. It does lead south to the kingdom, the Doke Kingdom. Uh, that tends to be kind of a no man's land from Killgate, that people tend to kind of keep an eye on just in case, and that's kind of that international boundary line that you just don't cross. So it's not just everything past Dawnbrook is swamp and ocean. There's a lot more there. There's just quite a few of these larger city settlements that live along the coastline because for trade it's much more advantageous to try to take a larger ship around to Pine Hall or Spiritport or any of the other coastal cities along the Delta region, so that you don't have to travel through the through the dangerous Murk Coast region in and of itself, the dangerous swamp territories. So, thank you all for watching, and remember, it doesn't take that much to make a difference out there. So be the difference that you want to see, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.